Let's face it, there have been a lot of Spider-Man video games, some of which might have excelled more than others, while the rest of them might have been enjoyable, but not as impactful as some people might have hoped for. Luckily, that has changed in recent years, mainly in thanks to the primary releases of the Marvel Spider-Man games developed by Insomniac, where Spidey has been able to fully thrive within a AAA format that all of his fans have been desperately waiting for. And knowing that the upcoming Marvel Spider-Man sequel is going to completely push the boundaries as to what it means to develop a game on next-gen hardware is genuinely going to make it an absolutely unforgettable experience of Spider-Man within the realm of video games. But besides the Insomniac Spider-Man franchise being the total juggernaut that it is, and knowing that Marvel's Spider-Man 2 is going to completely focus on one of my all-time personal favorite Spider-Man villains ever, there is one other Spider-Man game in particular which I not only believe to be one of the best video game experiences ever developed for a comic book character, but is also one of the greatest translations that I've personally ever seen of a comic book being fully developed into a completely playable video game, whose legacy is still fondly remembered to this very day, and in all honesty, is one of the greatest Spider-Man video games ever made. Enter Ultimate Spider-Man, based off the comics of the same name, that was also entirely developed by Treyarch and Activision during their main years of working on Marvel licensed games. Now, for the most part, when people go to look back at some of the previous Spidey games that have released ages ago, the main one that stands out the most is without a doubt the Spider-Man 2 movie tie-in game, which before the release of Spider-Man PS4 was the primary game that people looked at as the best Spider-Man gaming experience that anyone could possibly play. And even though I thoroughly love everything about that game, I personally believe that Ultimate Spider-Man trumps it in every way imaginable. Well, except in regards to the web swinging mechanics, which are still to this day extremely fun to utilize. However, if you want to learn more about my in-depth thoughts about the overall gameplay mechanics for both Spider-Man 2 and Ultimate Spider-Man, definitely be sure to check out my Radioactive Replay series and Radioactive Reviews for any and all kinds of Spider-Man games. No! That was garbage. I'm okay! I'm okay! Keep going! Keep going! You can win! You can win! Go for it, Spider-Man! Yes! Oh my god, that was insane! But in this case, I mainly wanted to talk about something much more important, and something that to this day can still be seen as a truly groundbreaking idea, which has yet to be replicated in any other superhero game since. Now, to break it down for any of you out there who might be unfamiliar with this series, is that the Ultimate Spider-Man comics were released in the year of 2000, which was the very beginning of the 21st century, and Marvel's main goal with the Ultimate Spider-Man comics was to modernize Spider-Man in a new era for brand new Spider-Man readers. That meant making Peter Parker younger again within the comics by placing him into a high school setting, while simultaneously putting some twists and turns on the main lore of Peter Parker's background, as well as all the origins of his iconic foes. And as you might have expected, the series was a huge hit for Marvel, primarily in thanks to the new narrative direction that Spidey was taken in by comic writer Brian Michael Bendis, as well as illustrator Mark Bagley, whose reinvigorating writing and utterly iconic visuals made the Ultimate Spider-Man series one of the standout franchises coming from Marvel Comics. But shockingly, it wouldn't be that much longer until Ultimate Spider-Man made an even bigger impact within the entertainment medium as a whole. Because if you remember, the Ultimate Spider-Man game didn't release until September of 2005, which was only 5 years after the Ultimate Spider-Man comics actually began. But what you might have not known is that the development for Ultimate Spider-Man actually didn't start until June of 2003, which was only 3 short years after the main launch of the Ultimate Spider-Man comics. And even crazier is that the core catalyst of the Ultimate Spider-Man game's story directly relates to to the comic narrative pertaining to Venom, where the main comic issue which initially introduced Eddie Brock into the Ultimate Comics universe wasn't until February of 2003, which was only 4 months before the development started for this game. And according to Brian Michael Bendis himself, the Ultimate Spider-Man comics sold nearly double by the time they introduced Ultimate Venom, which, as you can probably tell, made Activision want Treyarch to make a game based on the Ultimate Comics even more. But instead of Treyarch deciding to make another run-of-the-mill Spidey game by simply using the Ultimate license, they instead amazingly brought to life the entirety of the Ultimate Spider-Man comic universe into a video game format. Essentially, they transformed the Ultimate Marvel Comics universe into a completely living and breathing world, not just in the terms of its visual style, but also in regards to its story, which in my opinion is one of the most unique things that has ever been done in any form of superhero video game. While there were a plethora of Ultimate Spider-Man comics that did release before the game's main launch that Treyarch could pull from, they decided to make a full-on continuation of one of the best storylines from the Ultimate Spider-Man comics, of course directly relating to Venom, where the game's main plot takes place 3 months after all the events that took place within the Ultimate Venom narrative arc, and even goes above and beyond for all the comic readers at the time, where the game itself actually introduced characters that were never showcased within the Ultimate Comics at that point, such as in the cases of the Ultimate versions of Beetle and Silver Sable, who are easily two of the best standout characters within the entirety of the Ultimate Spider-Man game.
Hey! Where'd you get the cool suit? And by cool, I mean cumbersome and riveting.
Mine, and you can't have him.
It's that kind of quality human interaction that makes it all worthwhile.
Not only that, but the entirety of the game story, just like the comics, was also written by Brian Michael Bendis, who was a main producer working on the game at that point, which allowed Treyarch and Activision to deliver one of the most authentic Spider-Man experiences ever created for die-hard comic fans and gamers alike. Even some of the Ultimate Spider-Man comics' most important dialogue from the Venom arc was directly translated into the game's main voice acting, where in the eyes of any ride-or-die Ultimate Spider-Man fan is basically a dream come true, which in my opinion was delivered beautifully by Sean Marquette, who without a doubt is the primary voice actor that I still hear to this day whenever I go back to read the Ultimate Spider-Man comics.
That is it. That is... Gah! Every time I turn around, there's some greedy piece of garbage looking to turn something of value into a twisted nightmare. Osborn, Nick Fury, Octavius, all of them. Garbage. Preying on guys like my dad. Someone tries to do something worthwhile. Someone tries to make the world a better place than they found it, and what happens? Every time. Listen to me, Eddie. You're smarter than this. This isn't you, it's the suit. I've been behind it. I know what it's doing to you. Let me help you before you do something you're going to regret. I gotta get out of here with this. Now I'm fighting supervillains on my school grounds? In my civilian clothes? Without my web shooters? I gotta get Eddie off campus before somebody gets hurt. Or before the 3 people left in the world who don't know I'm really Spider-Man figure it out. So stupid. If anybody gets hurt, this is my fault. You people, hello? What does it take for you to run for your lives? No!
Our fathers died to create me, and now you will too. Come here, Peter.
Imagine that instead of receiving a brand new and original story within Spider-Man PS4, that on the other hand we got a brand new AAA Spider-Man game which was essentially a complete retelling of the comic storyline of the night that Gwen Stacy died, and the game would serve as an epilogue to the overall plot that took place in that comic. Or if the Batman Arkham series ended up being a trilogy developed by Rocksteady, which was a complete overall retelling of The Dark Knight Returns, and also expanding upon that universe within the game's world. That is exactly what Ultimate Spider-Man was, and was for sure an unforgettable experience for any fan of the Ultimate Spider-Man comics at the time. This was translated incredibly in-game thanks to the artwork that was done by Mark Bagley, where the developers at Treyarch made sure to try and incorporate as much authenticity of the art style from the Ultimate Comics into the game as frequently as possible, which is why this game's art style is pretty much timeless. Not just in thanks to the cel-shaded graphics making everything look like a breathing comic book, but that the art itself is pretty much Mark Bagley's work visualized into a 3D setting. Even every single cutscene that takes place within this game is filled to the brim with comic book aesthetics, such as comic book panels translating from one scene to the next, comic book onomatopoeias showcasing sound effects taking place within the game's universe, and even more dynamic shading and color grading, which truly makes this Spider-Man game stand out amongst all the rest. Although I thoroughly enjoy everything that Sony Pictures Animation was able to do with the visual art style and comic book aesthetic in the Into the Spider-Verse animated movie, I genuinely think that the Ultimate Spider-Man game might have done it a bit better. Not just by displaying some of the most iconic moments from the Venom arc in the Ultimate Comics beat for beat within the game's cutscenes, but also by creating some extremely dynamic cinematography while mixing it in with the comic book art style pretty much seamlessly. Even at the very end of the game, we finally get to see the infamous plane crash that took place for both Peter and Eddie's parents, which was something that was never revealed within the Ultimate Spider-Man comics. That is until later on within the Ultimate Spider-Man comics, where Bendis pretty much retconned everything that took place within the game and retold the events of the game within Ultimate Spider-Man War of the Symbiotes, which in my opinion is a massive downgrade to the story that took place within the game's core narrative. But it is still cool that the legacy of the game still technically lives on within Ultimate Comics canon, while at the same time the entirety of the Ultimate Spider-Man game is one big love letter to the Ultimate Spider-Man comics, while also enhancing the entirety of the original Ultimate Venom comic narrative arc from top to bottom, and in my opinion easily makes it a must-play title for any fan of Spider-Man or the Ultimate Comics.
I think the idea of doing the Ultimate Spider-Man as though it's a living comic book is a great idea. That doesn't work if you're taking a badly done comic book. But when you take a comic book as good as the Ultimate Spider-Man and you put it into a game as good as what Activision is capable of doing, and you combine those two so that the player gets the feeling that he's not only playing a video game, but he's playing a comic book which has come to life. I mean, that's got to be incredibly exciting. I was really sucked into the world of Spider-Man while I was watching that game. It's unbelievable. I think that these video games are just about the greatest kind of entertainment you could find anywhere.
In the end, everybody, I believe without a shadow of a doubt that the Ultimate Spider-Man game is Treyarch and Activision's magnum opus, and is one of the greatest achievements to have ever been made within the video game and comic book medium. Every single person who worked on this game knew exactly what they set out to do, and executed the final product with utter grace and perfection, sincerely making this Spider-Man game live up to its ultimate legacy, a legacy that still lives on all these years later, and is nothing short of absolute brilliance. Only time will tell to see exactly how well Marvel's Spider-Man 2 does when it comes to portraying this ultimate dynamic between Peter, Miles, and Venom. But if any of these past Spidey games are any indication to go off of, I definitely think that we are in extremely good hands. And I, for one, just can't wait to see where this journey will take us.
Bad enough I was bit by a genetically altered spider. Now I have all kinds of spider-related wacky superpowers. Plus I got midterms next week, and I'm swinging around when I should be studying. But now half the city thinks I'm a web-slinging freak, because according to every newspaper, TV show, and goofy website on the freaking planet, that's exactly what I am. But what if I am? What if the spider bite was just a kind of catalyst or something? Maybe I should look into it. Can you imagine? Maybe I'm a mutant like the X-Men. And I think I have problems. Mutants have it bad. The entire country is out of their minds in mutant panic. People just love to be ignorant. What if the spider that bit me was a mutant? What if it was a human mutant spider trying to tell me something when it bit me, like, help me? Like Jeff Goldblum in that movie when he turned into a fly. Maybe I'm going to grow extra arms. I hate myself. I think I officially have superhero obsessive-compulsive disorder. Now I'm obsessing that I'm a mutant, when I know I'm not. Like I don't actually have things to preoccupy myself with. I swear, all I need is like a brain off button. I am bored out of my freaking mind. A young man with this much power, and not to mention this much responsibility, shouldn't be this bored on a Saturday night. Shouldn't I have some kind of superhero thing to do? I mean, something? Anything? Help? Some evil to thwart? But there's nothing going on. Nothing. Zippo. Doesn't have to be pure evil. Just, I don't know, 40% evil? Just enough evil where thwarting is appropriate. A nice evil thwart. Thwart. That's a weird word. Thwart.